Hello and welcome back to the Crime Reel. For today's true crime narration, we shall be looking at 3 brutal murders that took place in 1997 that still haunt the small community of Powell in East Tennessee some 25 years later. By all accounts, the Lillelid family were good people. Vidar was born in Bergen, Norway in May 1962, the youngest of 4 children, and then moved to Florida when he was in his 20s. In the US, he met the woman who would ultimately become his wife, Delphina, who was born in New Jersey in March of 1969. The couple married in February 1989 in Miami, Florida, and had a daughter the following year who they named Tabitha. After Tabitha's birth, the family looked for a peaceful place to raise their children away from the big city. They decided on Knoxville in Tennessee. Their son Peter was born in 1995, and by the end of 1996 they had moved from their apartment into their dream home. It was a 50-year-old house in the Powell community where they had plans to renovate an annex for Delphina's mother. Vidar worked as a bellman at the Holiday Inn Cedar Bluff in West Knoxville, whilst Delphina remained at home to raise and homeschool their 2 children. The couple were deeply religious and devout Jehovah's Witnesses. On the 6th of April 1997, they attended a religious convention at Freedom Hall in Johnson City, which was around 100 miles away from where they lived. The family travelled home after the convention in their 1987 Dodge minivan, heading south on Interstate 81. Just before 7:20 p.m. that evening, they pulled into the rest area at mile marker 41 around halfway through their journey. 2-year-old Peter was suffering from an earache and was feeling restless, so Vidar took him for a walk whilst Delphina and Tabitha headed to the toilets or restrooms. On the way there, Delphina stopped to chat with a friend, Karen Sinclair, and her teenage daughter, Cara, who were also heading home from the convention. Vidar and Peter were waiting by the door at the visitor centre when 2 young girls came out. Vidar smiled at them and asked if they believed in God, to which they replied that they did not. 2 young men then joined them, and when Vidar asked them if they would like to learn more about God, the man said that they would. The 2 young men, 20-year-old Joseph Risner and 14-year-old Jason Bryant, along with the 2 women, Natasha Cornett, who was 18, and 17-year-old Karen Howell, headed over to the picnic area with Vidar and Peter, who had now been joined by Delphina and Tabitha. Vidar began talking through the basics of the Jehovah's Witness faith, whilst Delphina waved goodbye to her friend Karen. Shortly afterwards, Joseph went over to his car where 2 other friends, 19-year-old Edward Mullins and 18-year-old Crystal Sturgill, were waiting. Joseph returned to the group, pulled out a 9mm gun and said, "I'm sorry about this. Everybody just be quiet and nothing's going to happen to you. All we need is the van." Joseph knew that his own car, a blue Chevrolet Citation, was on its last legs and had seen the family arrive in the minivan just a few minutes earlier. Joseph had also picked up a speeding ticket an hour or so earlier as the group travelled through Gate City in Virginia. That, together with the fact that they had stolen 2 guns and some money before they had left their hometown of Betsy Lane in Kentucky, meant that they needed a reliable car to make their escape before their families and the police caught up with them. With the gun in hand, Joseph ordered the family to return to their minivan. Vidar offered to give the group his wallet and keys, but they refused. The family were forced into the van with Natasha, Karen, Joseph and Jason. Vidar was made to drive, and as they pulled out of the rest area, Edward and Crystal followed them in Joseph's car. All 6 of the group had extremely troubled pasts. Broken homes, academic failures, emotional and sexual abuse, drug use and alcohol were all common themes in their lives. 2 days earlier, they had stayed at the Collie Motel on US 23 in Pikeville, Kentucky, where they had started to burn 666 in the carpet. They all took part in seances and satanic rituals, and it was believed that it was here that their sinister plans may have begun to take shape. They returned to Natasha's trailer after the motel stay and told her mother, Madonna Wallen, that they were going to start the Armageddon, with Karen adding, "The end of time is coming." On Sunday the 6th of April, the group went to the home of a police officer where Jason created a disturbance outside to distract the officer. Other members of the group then entered the home taking 2 guns, 2 boxes of ammunition and around $500. Natasha was said to be desperate to escape her life. She claimed to have spoken to angels and demons since the age of 4, was obsessed with witchcraft, and would refer to herself as Satan's daughter. She had threatened her mother with a knife and would tell her friends that she had dreams of living out one of her favourite movies, Natural Born Killers. From a young age she had been drinking alcohol and using illegal drugs such as heroin, ecstasy and cocaine. Natasha was extremely close to Karen. Karen grew up in a violent household and claimed that she was sexually abused between the ages of 5 and 10 by both her uncle and cousin. She had a fascination with the occult and witchcraft and also regularly used illegal drugs. Joseph, who was the oldest of the group, had been a good student up until his mother and stepfather's divorce. He then started drinking and using drugs. He had previously been dating Natasha, but was now dating Karen. Natasha was dating another member of the group, Edward, who seemed to have the most normal life of the 6. He was working towards his GED, or General Educational Diploma, and had a job at a grocery store. However, once he became involved with Natasha, who he was planning to marry, his behaviour deteriorated significantly. Jason, the youngest, was already on probation and despite his young age had a long history of drug and alcohol abuse. He had an IQ of around 85 and his emotional and social skills were said to be severely underdeveloped. It was reported that he had let Natasha carve her initials into his arm to show his strength and gain credibility with the others. Crystal was fairly new to the group. She performed fairly well at school but suffered emotional neglect at home. In December 1996, she accused her stepfather of sexual abuse and was thrown out of her house. She ended up living with various different people over the following few months, including Natasha. As the groups travelled south on the I-81, Delphina attempted to keep her children calm by singing to them until Jason ordered her to shut up. Young Tabitha even offered Karen one of her chocolates during the drive. Shortly before 9 p.m. that evening, 2 calls were made to 911 reporting gunshots on Payne Hollow Lane in Greenville. Someone who lived nearby said that they had heard shots and seen 2 vehicles pull up but only 1 leave. The second person, a contractor working on a water tower, heard 2 bursts of gunfire, one after the other, followed by a muddled commotion, like children on a playground. Deputy Jeff Morgan and his supervisor arrived at around 9 p.m. They initially saw the headlights of a blue Chevrolet Citation at a strange angle in the road. It had clearly been abandoned, having got stuck on top of a stump in the mud. The car was empty and the number plate had been removed. It was what they found in a ditch next to the car which would stay with them forever. 4 bodies, a man and a woman, with a young boy and young girl lying on top of them. 6-year-old Tabitha was lying on top of her father, Vidar, and 2-year-old Peter was on top of his mother, Delphina. All 4 had been shot, and Vidar and Delphina's legs had been crushed by tyre tracks. As the police investigated further, Tabitha made a slight movement and was rushed to hospital. Doctors at the University of Tennessee Medical Center in Knoxville worked through the night trying to save the little girl, but she was pronounced dead the following day. Meanwhile, Peter was laying across his mother's body with his face in the mud. As Deputy Jeff Morgan turned him over, Peter let out a cry. The deputy sat and held him until the ambulance arrived, and Peter was also rushed to hospital. He survived, but had suffered severe spinal damage, lost an eye, and it was thought that he would have suffocated had he been left in the mud much longer. At the autopsy, Dr. Cleland Blake concluded that the family had been lined up along the ditch and shot one after the other. It is believed that Vidar was killed first. He was shot in the right eye, an injury that would have rendered him unconscious immediately. He was then shot 4 more times whilst lying in the ditch. Delfina was originally shot in the left arm and then the left leg. Neither of these wounds were fatal. She was shot 6 more times, and it is believed that she was most likely alive during the subsequent attacks on her children and when she was run over by the minivan. Tabitha had been shot once in the head. Peter had been shot twice. The first bullet entered his head behind his right ear, exiting through his right eye. The second bullet hit him in the back. When trying to escape, the Chevrolet Citation had got wedged on a tree stump, so the 6 perpetrators jumped into the minivan, driving over Vidar and Delfina as they rushed away. Despite the number plates of the Citation having been removed, the vehicle identification number allowed the authorities to trace the owner. This was Joseph's mother, Mary Castle. She then told the police that she hadn't seen her son in 2 days and did not know where he was. However, she did know who he was with, and she gave the police the names of the 5 other members of the group, all of whom were missing as well. The police now knew exactly who they were looking for and the car that they were travelling in. Less than 48 hours later, at around 5 p.m. on Tuesday the 8th of April, a 1987 Dodge was stopped at the checkpoint at the US-Mexican border in Douglas, Arizona. The occupants had failed to show the correct paperwork and were claiming that they were lost. When asked who the van belonged to, the driver, Joseph, shrugged and said that he didn't know. The group were ordered out of the car and placed under arrest. They were taken to Cochise County Jail, where, when the booking officer asked Natasha her religious preference, she replied, Satan. They were found to have several items belonging to the Lillelid family in their possession. Natasha had a piece of Vidar's belt and a picture of Tabitha in her purse. Karen had a Hello Kitty diary lock, which belonged to Tabitha, and Crystal had the keyring to the Lillelid family home. None of these items had any value, so it can be assumed that they were trophies from their kills. District Attorney Barclay Bell sought immediate extradition for the group so that they would return to Tennessee to face trial, and made it known that he would be seeking the death penalty for the 4 adults involved. The juveniles, Karen and Jason, were facing potential life sentences without the possibility of parole. Outrage over the mindless and random killings was intense. In Knox County, a convenience store owner hung 6 nooses on a scaffold in front of his business, claiming that he was against lynching but pro-capital punishment. A crowd chanting "Burn in Hell" had assembled when the 4 adults were escorted by deputies back to Greene County. Criminal Court Judge Eddie Beckner denied repeated defence requests to try the 6 separately. He did, however, rule that finding a fair jury in Greene County would be impossible, and as such a jury would be bussed in from Bradley County, which was about 150 miles away. The trial date was set for March 1998. However, the trial never came. In February that year, all 6 defendants pleaded guilty to the charges of murder and attempted murder as part of a plea deal to avoid the death penalty. The actual truth of who fired the fatal shots and who did what on April the 6th remains unknown. Each of the 6 tell differing stories of what happened after they arrived at Payne Hollow Lane, and those close to the case struggle to fully believe any one version of events. Natasha, Karen and Joseph all maintain that it was 14-year-old Jason who was the only shooter. They said that once they exited the van, there had been an argument over what to do with the family, at which point Jason started shooting. In the opinion of many, the idea of a single shooter does not match up with the forensics, and some believe that there were at least 2 shooters using the 2 guns. Jason claims that the other 3 made up the story when it was realised that he would not be facing the death penalty and would potentially have a lighter sentence due to his age. He claims that it was Joseph and Edward who had fired the guns that night. By most accounts, it was agreed that Crystal, who has always maintained that she did not hurt anyone, did not leave the car during the shootings. However, as part of the deal, all 6 were given the same sentence. 3 consecutive life sentences without the possibility of parole, plus an additional consecutive sentence of 25 years in prison for Peter's attempted murder. Appeals were filed for Karen Howell and Jason Bryant due to the later US Supreme Court decision that restricts the imposition of life sentences on juveniles. These appeals have been denied, and all 6 still remain in prison in Tennessee. After lengthy hospital treatment, including a prosthetic eye and numerous complicated surgeries, and also a custody battle between Vidar and Delfina's families, Peter eventually went to live with his father's sister in Sweden. He has recovered significantly, but not fully, from his injuries, and returned to live in the US, where he is now married and works in IT. That concludes today's story. Thanks very much to D. Nagara for suggesting covering this case. Thanks again, D. Please subscribe to the channel, click like and add any comments down below. Thank you for listening to the Crime Reel. Stay safe. Goodbye. Psst. In Knoxville, there is a 266-foot structure that was built for the 1982 World Fair. It has a 75-foot gold-coloured glass sphere at the top. Goodbye.